Another planet. Jason had no idea what the hell just happened. He blinked at Henry and slowly looked around, keeping the rest of his body completely still. When his eyes met Henry's again, only the wild shock he saw on his friend's face convinced him he was not imagining things. Well, that and his butt still itched from a mosquito bite he'd gotten earlier that day. The discomfort of the insect bite and the sound of the soft breeze rustling through the grass somehow drove home his reality. He definitely wasn't dreaming. Both men stood in modern martial arts protective gear, holding polypropylene training swords in guard positions. The hill they stood on rose out of a small valley, surrounded by flowers poking up out of long grass that swayed in the light breeze. The clouds overhead served as a patchwork ceiling for the mountains in the distance. It was a beautiful place. The only problem was that seconds earlier, both men had been surrounded by a wooden fence in Jason's backyard. Jason glanced down at his feet, continuing to keep the rest of his body still, and saw he was crushing some flowers. He thought back carefully to the moment he'd suddenly found himself in the field, and barely remembered feeling a slight drop before hitting the ground again. Almost at the same time he lowered his training sword, he saw Henry do the same. Henry's short goatee complemented his Asian features, and he looked casually comfortable in sweats and training gear, same as he always looked. Jason had always been a little jealous of how Henry could pull that off. Jason felt awkward and gangly in anything he wore. He took his fencing mask and padded helmet off, turning in place to glance behind him. He couldn't see any buildings or other signs of civilization anywhere. He was about to ask Henry what was going on when a loud voice thundered, "Hello!" Jason was almost startled out of his skin. While he was still remembering how to breathe and putting his heart back in his chest, Jason realized the voice had come from above him. He looked up and saw a huge man wearing odd clothing and a mocking grin hovering in midair about 30 feet off the ground. It was obvious the giant was aware how badly he'd startled both men on the ground. Jason immediately disliked him, the feeling transcending his surprise at meeting a 10-foot-tall man who could defy gravity. The man in the air wore clothes that left strange places, like his knees, uncovered but flowed and gathered in other odd areas, like his wrists. His clothing's colors were all over the place, too. It sort of looked like he'd tried wearing a few different outfits composed of every color of the rainbow all at once. And beneath all of that, Jason could see flashes of metal as well as tools of some sort hanging off of a belt. The huge man's somehow graceful legs ended in stone sandals, and his head bore a crown of the same material. His face was completely hairless, and his facial structure was subtly different from any Jason had ever seen before. He looked like an idealized version of a man. The man bowed in midair, spread his arms, and said, "You'll have to forgive me for skipping the small talk, but I've transported so many of you disgusting little Terrans to this planet that I no longer bother. It's not personal. You may call me Dolos, the great god Dolos." He seemed to wait a few seconds for signs of recognition at the name, but Jason and Henry were too busy staring with their mouths open. Dolos made an impatient gesture and grunted, "Of course, I already know who you two are." He pointed at Jason and said, "Jason James Booth, 27 Terran years old, working in IT, single. Nothing all that amazing about you. You have an embarrassing fondness for children's cartoons and candy. I doubt that you will survive long." Then he pointed at Henry. "And you, Henry Mirai Soto, 29 years old, recently divorced, used to be a U.S. Army combat medic, but worked as an EMT for the last few years. He dropped out of college to work full-time because your mother got cancer and your family needed money." Dolos smiled grimly and said, "You probably have a better chance of survival than your friend, but I doubt you will live more than a week either." And just like that, Jason's shock and fear began to evaporate. Rather than stunning or amazing him, as Dolos had probably intended, the brief summaries of their lives just pissed him off. This floating guy was a dickhead.